Good afternoon and welcome to Ask an Expert with Alicia. This afternoon, we'll be spending time about requesting an evaluation for special education. Alicia is part of the Ask team, and she will unpack and share some resources and also invite you to be a part of answering some questions. We're very excited to have you here, and we appreciate you taking time out of your afternoon to be a part of this. All right, Alicia, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Deb. Well, good afternoon. I am glad to have you here today. I'm going to be sharing again, as Deb said, about requesting an evaluation for special education. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that you can see the slides as I go through them. I believe they will also be sent out after the webinar. And all right, we'll go ahead and get started then. So again, welcome. My name is Alicia, and so I'm here just to talk briefly about requesting an evaluation for special education. So first, I would like to go through some of the learning objectives for today. So I hope that by the end of this webinar, you will be able to have learned the following pieces and grown your knowledge on the following pieces of information around special education evaluation. I strive to have participants grow in their understanding of how to request an evaluation for special education. I hope that participants will learn the conditions that trigger a special education evaluation under IDEA, or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And then third, participants will grow in their understanding of the next steps for completing an evaluation for special education. And so before we get into the material, I want to take a moment to kind of navigate to our website and show you where you can find the resource that I'm kind of speaking from. So this document that we've created at Ask is titled Requesting an Evaluation for Special Education. And so as I navigate this on the screen for you, you are welcome to do the same. So you're just going to go to www.askresource.org. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing so that I can get into that. All right, so this is our home page, or our home screen, if you will. One of the ways you can navigate to this particular document is just by using the search bar. And so I'm just going to type in requesting an evaluation. And that should take us, and I didn't even spell it right, but it should take us right to the resource that I am referencing. And that's this top one, requesting an evaluation for special education, disability suspected, and the initial evaluation. So when I click on the Ask Resource PDF, it's going to bring up this document. It's a 2-page document, and that is what I will be discussing today and presenting about. The other resource I do want to highlight while we're on the website would be, if I go back here to our search page, I'm not even going to type in a new category, but I'm going to just keep scrolling. We do have several sample letters on our website, and there is one specific to requesting an evaluation for special education. So not to make you dizzy as I scroll down, but I believe it's towards the end. Here we go. Sample letter requesting an evaluation for special education eligibility. If you click on that, you can access either the printable PDF or just the website page where it gives a sample letter for how to make your request. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into the presentation a little further. So I'm going to stop and I'm going to go back to the presentation. But now you know hopefully how to find that after the webinar, or down the road if you're needing this resource. So next, I would like to just ask a little bit from each of you. I'd like to get to know the audience a little bit better. So I'm going to ask that you put in chat either A, B, C, or D. Which one best describes you? Your child has an individualized education program or an IEP. That's A. B, my child has a 504 plan. C, my child does not currently have an IEP or 504 plan, but I believe that my child needs special education services. Or D, I'm a professional that serves individuals with an IEP or 504 plan. We ran into this a little bit last week too. Okay, hopefully it's not going to jump ahead like 5 now because I've hit the arrow too many times. All right, so next we're going to talk about some of the sections on our document talk about, what do I do? What can I do if I believe my child needs special education services? So they're not currently on an IEP. Maybe they have a 504 plan, maybe they don't, but I believe that there is something going on that's impacting my child's education. So you're going to see what we refer to as our pyramid. Sometimes you might hear educators refer to this as the multi-tiered system of supports, or MTSS. I want to talk a little bit about supports that students can get when they're in school. And so I'll start by saying that any parent can request an evaluation for special education if you believe that a disability may be impacting your child's success in school. Children can also get interventions in the general education setting, however, and that may be enough to support them appropriately. So that's why I'm sharing this pyramid. So I want to just talk about the sections in the pyramid. So in the blue section, which shows universal, that means this is what all students receive as far as instruction. In the blue section, the universal instruction is what all students receive, whether or not they receive specialized instruction through special education services. All students receive this level of support. Next up, we have the orange section, which highlights supplemental instruction or interventions. That's going to be some students that are requiring that level of support. And that might look like an intervention that's being done in the general education setting. And again, that may be enough to support a student. The last, or the tippy top part of our pyramid, is that intensive instructional support. That's going to be fewer students that are receiving that level of support. When we think about special education, that is that level of support that a few students may require that intensive instructional support. And so again, if parents have concerns that that universal level is not helping their child make meaningful progress in their education, then they may have concerns that a disability is impacting their education. And so as a parent, you can request an evaluation for special education. I also want to note at this point that if it's brought to your attention, either at a conference or through some sort of communication from the school, that your child is having difficulty in school, whether that be in an academic area, behavior, social, if it's brought to your attention that your child might be struggling in some area, it is your right as a parent to ask what interventions have been tried, what has worked well, what's not working well. That's definitely a time when that communication should be happening between school and home. So now I'm going to move on to that next slide where we talk about, when a parent has really decided that, no, I really think that there's something more going on. I think that perhaps there's something impacting their education, or I know that they have a disability. Maybe they just received a diagnosis of some sort. And you want to move forward with making a request. So it's kind of twofold, what I want to talk about here. The first thing, and this really addresses that first objective, that you will grow in your understanding of how to request that evaluation. Again, parents may request an evaluation at any time. However, a full and individual initial evaluation is only required if the child is suspected of having a disability. So that's what we're going to talk about here. The first step would be that you can put your request for a special education evaluation in writing. Again, I shared that sample letter that you're welcome to use. You can also just, draft your own communication to the school or AEA asking for that evaluation. In that request, you want to state why you believe your child needs an evaluation and be very specific about the areas that you have concerns about. Maybe it is academics, or maybe it's not academics at all, but you're concerned about some behaviors or social skills. Whatever the skill areas that you have concern about, put those in your request for the evaluation. The next step that's going to happen is that there has to be a disability suspect conversation or meeting. So sometimes it's a meeting. It does not, it's not legally required to hold a meeting, but there has to be a discussion on whether or not a disability is suspected, and that conversation has to include family. When a disability suspected meeting is held, that's usually within 10 calendar days of notifying the school. So that's you notifying the school in writing that you're requesting an evaluation. When you come together, that is not the time when you're deciding if your child qualifies for special education or is eligible for special education. This is just the time where the discussion is there a disability that is suspected? So you might want to prepare and bring relevant information to that meeting to show your concerns that you have for your child. Maybe it's some outside reports from different providers. Maybe it's sharing what you experience at home with your child and where your concerns come from. At that point, the team decides if there might be a disability that is impacting educational performance. It is important to note that the bar for determining if a disability is suspected is very intentionally set low. There should be nothing that prevents the team, at least considering whether to move forward with that evaluation. They don't, there's no need to insist that there be some interventions tried first. That bar is really very intentionally set low. If there's any reason that disability is suspected, then the team can agree to move on to do the full and individual initial evaluation. I also wanted to note here that suspicion of disability is not dependent on the time of year. So we often hear from families who maybe bring concerns to the school, and maybe it's in the spring, and so they might hear, well, it's the end of the year, we're going to go ahead and we should just wait until next year. Suspicion of disability, again, is not dependent on the time of year. If there is a suspicion of disability, it doesn't matter if it's the beginning of the year, middle of the year, or the end of the year. It's the obligation of the team, again, including the parents, to move forward in a timely manner to determine if disability is suspected. However, I do want to say that, again, the team can decide, and that involves parents being a part of that decision. They may decide that it is best to go ahead and wait and hold off on requesting their evaluation until this new school set year has begun. Because sometimes we recognize and know that data collected is going to be perhaps more meaningful and relevant if the child is in the school setting. So that can be part of the team decision, but it can't unilaterally be decided that it's the end of the year, so we can't move forward with suspecting a disability. All right, so next, this addresses objective number 2. There are 4 conditions that trigger a special education evaluation under IDEA. That's Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So the first one would be that the child has a disability that meets one of the 13 categories of disability under IDEA, and that the disability has an impact on the student's educational performance. So if you recall, last week, my colleague explained that Iowa is a non-categorical state, meaning that you don't have to have a formal diagnosis of a disability to be considered eligible for special education necessarily. Conversely, just because a child does have a diagnosis that may fall into one of these 13 categories, that doesn't guarantee or automatically qualify a child in Iowa for special education services. However, this could trigger that evaluation. So you've got a child who falls into one of those categories, and we'll get further into what those categories are in the document. They're highlighted, those 13 categories, but then it also has to be impacting their educational performance. Number 2 would be that data suggests the child is not meeting grade level standards and is unique compared to his or her peers. Number 3 is data suggests that the child has received high quality instruction, but is not making progress towards the expected minimum standard that is set for all students. And then last but not least, the child has received both high quality instruction. Some of those interventions, think back to that orange tier, maybe some general education interventions have been tried. And they are making progress, but they will likely need more support or ongoing support. So those are 4 conditions that would trigger moving forward with a special education evaluation. When considering if there is a suspicion of disability, the team should consider if there is evidence. Again, that could be data, it could be anecdotal records, it could be outside reports, anything that suggests the child might have a disability. Again, I want to highlight that the bar for suspecting a disability is intentionally low. If the team agrees that the evidence suggests that a disability might be the cause of difficulties that a child is having in school, then the team really should move forward with that special education evaluation. Difficulties in school impacting a student's educational performance can go beyond academics. And I'm not going to get into this deeply. My colleague next week will talk about this more, but I just wanted to highlight that it can be more than just academics that are impacted. So there are 7 different performance domains or skill areas to consider in addition to academics. Some of those include behavior, communication, health. Again, my colleague will discuss the performance domains and get a little deeper into that next week, but really consider more than just academics. All right. There are a couple different reasons why a district or AEA cannot refuse an evaluation for special education. So if you hear something like, well, your child's not failing, so we're not going to evaluate them for special education, they're getting good grades. A child does not have to be failing in order to be suspected of a disability and evaluated for special education. For example, maybe there's a child who maintains really good scores and gets good grades on daily work, but then really struggles to do well on assessments. Or maybe they take a great deal of time, and this might be something the school's not aware of, and that's why it's so important for parents to bring information to the table. Maybe that child is getting really good scores and grades, but they're spending, a great deal of time at home every night and checking in with parents, and parents are supporting significantly at home in order to obtain those grades. So that might be a reason to move forward with evaluation. The next bullet talks about performing at a certain percentile. So if you hear your child is not performing in the bottom 10th or 12th percentile of the class, that cannot be used as a reason to refuse an evaluation for special education. The third bullet talks about a child being refused for an evaluation because other interventions haven't been tried first. That cannot be a reason that's used. There's nothing that says a child must complete specific interventions for X number of weeks before being evaluated. 2 other things I want to highlight here. The decision to not evaluate for special education cannot be made unilaterally. So it cannot be just one person making that decision. That's the whole reason behind disability suspect meetings and bringing, people together to discuss it, including the family. There also cannot be predetermination. So what I mean by that is, there can't be you can't determine ahead of time that a student would not be eligible for special education before going through those necessary processes to determine if disability is suspected. One other thing is that teams should be careful that the decision to evaluate or not evaluate should not be based on just one source of data. The team really must consider all relevant information, including things that may be difficult sometimes to quantify, such as engagement, task engagement, peer engagement, social skills maybe. So it really needs to be a thoughtful conversation, and again, keeping that bar set low for suspected disability and whether or not the team agrees that we should move on to evaluate for special education. So then we come to the point where a decision is made by the team, including parents, on whether or not the evaluation will be conducted. If the answer is yes, then parents should receive forms to sign. So this is one of those times where parents are required to sign forms. And those forms are consent forms. So you're giving your permission to evaluate your child. So parents should receive, sign, and return those forms saying, yes, I agree to have my child evaluated in these areas. It can be expected that the evaluation will take place within 60 calendar days from when the school or AEA receives those signed papers. So if you discuss it and you're presented the papers on October 12th, but the AEA and school district doesn't receive the signed consent papers until October 30th, well, then that 60 calendar day timeline really doesn't start until October 30th. If the answer to the question, will my child be evaluated, is no, then parents have the right and should receive what's called a prior written notice. The prior written notice should document or provide an explanation of why the school and AEA refuses to conduct the evaluation. It should include a description of any other options that the team considered and why those were rejected. It should include a description of each of the sources of data that were used to make that decision. So maybe assessments, maybe, a letter from a physician, whatever was used, it should document what sources of data were used and why the evaluation was denied, as well as any other relevant factors to the school and AEA's refusal to evaluate. And then secondly, parents do have the right to disagree with that decision to not evaluate their child for special education, and the options to disagree can be found in your procedural safeguards manual for parents, which should be provided along with that prior written notice. Another place you can find those options is on our website, the Ask website, under dispute resolution options. When a parent requests an evaluation for special education, really whether it's in writing or not, there must be an action taken by the school district or AEA. So school districts and AEAs cannot simply ignore a parent's request for evaluation. Doesn't mean, again, that they have to say yes and move forward with the evaluation, but there should be an action taken. There should be a conversation around whether disability is suspected. Parents, I feel like it's also important to highlight this right as well. You also have the right as parents to decline consent for a full and individual initial evaluation. So you have the right to sign and move forward with that evaluation, but you also have the right to decline that consent. One other important note I wanted to make on the evaluation piece here is for children who are in early access or who have received early access services, so that birth to age 3, if they are transitioning from early access to school age, the team must complete an evaluation and hold a meeting to determine their eligibility for special education within 60 calendar days and prior to that child's 3rd birthday. So that's an important note for early access kiddos who are already receiving supports and services at home from that birth to 3. All right, and then we always like to include in our documents some essential questions to ask. So I wanted to highlight those here. So the first question would be, have I put my request for an evaluation in writing? Again, there's that sample form on our site, or it could be an email. I sometimes get questions from parents, do I have to do a formal, typed out letter? Email is sufficient. You can, send an email requesting that evaluation. And then secondly, what evidence can I provide the team to show that my child's disability is impacting his or her learning? So again, those pieces of data, if you will, that you can bring to the table to share. So those are 2 essential questions to consider. And then, as Deb shared earlier, we really rely on your feedback to help us get better, to let us know what information you're seeking. And then also we are required to report a lot of data so that we can continue to receive the funding to support families and professionals, and most importantly, students. And so if you would please complete that short survey that you get, we would greatly appreciate it. And then this last slide just shows our contact information. You can navigate to our website by askresource.org, or call our main office at the number on the screen. And so that is it for our presentation on how to request an evaluation for special education. Thanks, everyone.